All right, I'm in the Gospel of John, chapter 17, and I'm going to start out in verse 5. I'm going to move my way forward through several verses here, and so there's going to be a few different topics. It's going to sound like a few different topics. I'm going to be on this one, and I'm going to be on the next one, and it has a lot to do with the fact that I've decided I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about one individual one. You know, it may sound like I'm just trying to drag things out too long, and so I'm just going to move to the next one and fill in a good amount of time in that way. All right, so now beginning in the Gospel of John, chapter 17, verse 5, Jesus is expressing his prayer to God. This is the Lord praying at the end of his ministry. And in verse 5, Jesus said, "And now, O Father, glorify me together with yourself with the glory which I had with you before the world was." All right, now try to remember the definition I've been using of glorification, of glorify, and that God may be known. And so Jesus wants to be known, the Father wants to be known, and in this prayer, by praying this in the way that he did, what he is effectively saying is that he wants to be known in the way that he was before the world. You know, before the earth was even created, there was a way that he was. You know, and another way to kind of understand this is that when he created the world, he interacted. We have history concerning the interactions that God had with some of the people in the world throughout history, but that was him relating to those people at that time. Before the world existed and before there were the problems to solve and the conflicts to resolve, before that, he related to others in a different way, because he didn't have those problems, he didn't have those conflicts, he didn't have those things that he was working through, he did not have those goals that he was wanting to accomplish, he did not have those specific purposes that he was working on. All right? And so he's wanting to go back to how he would relate to himself, to others, to his, to his kingdom. Wants to go back to that before the world was, and to be known in that way. Okay, another way to think about this is that you have Jesus, who is God manifested in the flesh. All right, now before he manifested in the flesh, he was not manifested in the flesh. I know it can be a little bit problematic to state something so obvious as that. Okay, but this is important to recognize because he is about to exit the situation of him being here on earth as a man. He came to live as a man, and now this is the end of that. All right? This is the end of Jesus living as a man, or our God living as a man known as Jesus. This is the end of that. Okay, and I know this is going to be a little troubling to some people to consider, and so I'll give you a moment to try and absorb and consider the implications of this, because, I've encountered a lot of people who just really want God to be Jesus forever. And what I mean by that is they want him to be the man forever. They want him to teach the law forever. They want him to heal the sick and those who are lame forever. They want God to relate to us in the same way that he related to people when he was here on earth as a man conducting his ministry. And they don't want that to ever end. But it did end. Just like the old covenant came to an end and a new covenant went into effect. All right, there are going to be endings and there are going to be beginnings. And this is a little bit difficult for people to consider that God is not going to be relating to us in that way forever. This is another way to think about this is you'll notice that there are some people who are just really into Christmas in the context of they just want Jesus to be the baby in the manger forever. It's great that he was a baby in the manger. That was great. And then he was born there, and some wise guys came by and saw him and gave him some presents. I think that's wonderful. But he is not a baby anymore. And there are some people who are into Christmas only in the context of Jesus, the little baby, was born, and they just don't have any consideration for him growing up to be a man who is a king. No, we can't have. In fact, let's keep him on the donkey, he's just not going to stay on the donkey. He's not going to stay in the manger, right? That's not what he's going to do. That's not how he lives, how he functions. And so just as people want Jesus, want their God to stay as the little baby in the manger, they also want him to stay as the man who did his ministry, and he's going to be the king, the Messianic king, and they even want him to stay as the Messianic king forever, and he will be in a certain respect. But there are people that just expect that there will be the kingdom of God here on earth, where you have God ruling as the Messianic king, which I believe he will do, but they think he's going to do that forever, and he's going to enforce the law of Moses forever. From what I can tell, it's only good for about 1,000 years. All right, the millennial reign. And these are things to be fulfilled, and I am not an expert or guru on prophecy. I do not have any special unique insights on the subject, and so I don't teach on it because God has just simply not given me that kind of insight to work with. So I tell people what he's told me, and if he hasn't told me something, in general, I'll say this is what I think, but he didn't say this to me. All right, but people want him to stay like that for all eternity, and he's not going to do that. So what he's expressing, and this is something that the disciples overheard, is that he's not going to stay like he is for much longer. Now he's going to go back to functioning and living in a similar way as he did before the world was created. All right, before there was all the problems and all the conflict. I think a good way to understand this is that he expresses his love towards us outside of the sinfulness of humanity. Because he forgave the sins of the world, he forgave our sins. He now relates to us in the context of his love and of his acceptance and his understanding and his discernment. Okay, providing us with meaning and purpose in our lives. This is a different way of relating to us that he would have related to us in this way before the foundation of the world. Okay, this is a way to perhaps understand what he's talking about, at least a small way to begin to approach the topic. Okay, to just begin to consider it. But I think that this is something that you should really notice and that you should really pay attention to in verse 5 when he says, "And now, O Father, glorify me together with you, with yourself, with the glory which I had with you before the world was." He's talking about the unification within himself. Now, I am not going to live as a man, as a separate person who prays to his God. I'm going to stop that now. That's over. We know that Jesus resurrected from the dead. We know that he's alive. We know that he's functioning as our God. But he is not in heaven praying to the Father. All right? That's not happening. He is the living God. He has gone back to being himself who he is. And so we need to embrace the oneness of God. Recognize, sure, he came to function as a man. He did that. That's good. But he's done, and now he's different. So when I speak to my God, and if I may use the reference to Jesus, I'm still speaking to my one God. And if I use the word Son or Father, or everlasting Prince of Peace or everlasting Father, something like that, if I use those words, I'm still praying to one person, to one God, that he has unified himself after he expressed himself as the Father and the Son and as the Holy Spirit, that there is a unification. When I go to heaven, I do not expect to see 3 thrones. I just don't. Some people, you may feel that that's what you're going to see. You're going to see the elderly wise guy in the middle with the strong young fellow on his right hand, and you're going to see a little bit of a steam or a mist ascended above the seat of the chair on his left. That's what you expect to see. I don't expect to see that. I expect to see one person. Now, should he reveal himself in a similar manifestation as Jesus, as he was as a man, so I can recognize him as a man, with 2 arms, 2 legs, and some eyes and a nose, and that kind of thing, and the hairstyle might be similar. Okay, if he shows himself in that way, and he speaks to me using the same voice that he used with his disciples, then so be it. Praise the Lord. Okay, all right. I would appreciate that. But there are people who have this view of God as if what they believe is, in a sense, they believe in multiple gods, and I'm very sensitive about that. I'm just a little extra sensitive when it comes to that topic. All right. So that's the first thing I wanted to show you about this passage here in verse 5. I will now proceed into verse 6, which seems to reveal something a little different. In verse 6, I have manifested your name to the men whom you have given me out of the world. They were yours, you gave them to me, and they have kept your word. All right, well, let's start with this idea of keeping, they have kept your word. Well, to what extent? Does that mean that they never sinned? We know it doesn't mean that. That wouldn't make any sense at all. All right, so what does it mean to say that they have kept your word? Were they totally repentant and obedient to the law of God? No one is going to be able to achieve that. They kept his word in the sense that they received the word and they held it in their hearts. I think that's about as far as we could go with that. The implications of that, what more could be said about that, I think would be speculating a little bit too much and going outside of the boundaries of how much we have recorded. All right, so I will just pause there and say they kept his word to some extent. Whatever that would mean can be up for discussion, but I will not consider too much with regards to that and just consider that to be a general description. These are people who God gave to Jesus. Okay? How were they given? Does this mean that God individually, just individually decided, you, but not you, and just decided that these were specific people that would be given over to Jesus, and they had no choice in the matter, no decision in the matter whatsoever? All right, is that what it means? I understand that most people would like to believe that. I don't share in that opinion, but I will acknowledge that this is an opinion, that this is a point of view that a lot of people do have. And that's understood. I don't see it that way. I see it a little bit differently. From what I can tell, God just simply went out into the world, presented himself, and that there were some people who responded to the presentation and of himself. And so he chose them and he gave them, in a sense, to himself by just being true, being himself, and speaking the truth. He chose them in that way. All right? So what did he do? He presented the truth open-ended to everyone. That's what he did. the effect of that was that some people responded. So he gave these people to himself by what he did. Okay? He spoke the truth. He expressed the truth. Some people responded, and that was what took place by giving these people to himself. This is how I see it, in terms of giving these people to him. Again, in verse 6, I have manifested your name to the men whom you have given me out of the world. They were yours. You gave them to me, and they have kept your word. Now, does this also mean that there were some that were not God's, or some that were not given or could not be given, that God had, could not give these people? It just depends on your point of view. For example, let's start with the entire world as it is, just as the world. And you have a lot of people who are in the world. In every generation, there's a new group of people, right? Or every 100 years or 200 years or so, depending upon how long people will live, you'll find a whole new group of people. All right? Are these people gods? And in a sense, yes. Right? We'll start with the planet. This planet is his. Okay? It's his. The solar system is his. He can do whatever he wants with it. Okay? He can. It's his. And if there's any person, any living thing on this planet, that's his. Okay? You, whether you believe in God or not, are in effect his property. Okay? Whether you like it or not, whether you believe it or not, if you don't believe it, don't worry. The day will come when you'll get enough information to see that, yeah, you really are his, and he can do with you whatever he wants to do. And at the moment, if you're alive and you're listening to this, of course, then you probably got the sense that you can do whatever you want, and he is allowing you to do whatever you want and to decide whatever you want and believe whatever you want, but that's only going to be the case for so long. Eventually, you're not going to be able to do that anymore. You're not going to live here forever. You're going to die, and you're going to be brought before your God, and there is going to be a conversation. All right? There will be. And you will discover that you really are his. So everyone is his in the collective sense of the world. But for those who respond to the truth, that is another collective group of people. Those who want to have a relationship with him, that's another collective group of people who are his in the collective context of being his children. That's another group, all right? And they come out of the group of the world. So let's go back to verse 6 again. I have manifested your name to the men whom you have given me out of the world. They were yours. You gave them to me, and they have kept your word. Those who have believed the truth that was revealed to them, or have embraced it, or received it, and are holding on to it, even though they may not have as much of an understanding of what that means as God may like. All right, let me go into verse 7 and 8 from there. Verse 7 and 8, Jesus says, now they have known that all things which you have given me are from you. For I have given to them the words which you have given me, and they have received them. And they have known surely that I came forth from you. All right? And they have believed that you sent me. In verse 7, beginning in verse 7 again, now they have known that all things, and he goes on to say these things. Now! What do you mean now? What about a few days ago? Right? Now? Now they get it? Do they really? And how much? This is something that I'd like you to see, that there was some change over time. Okay? To say now doesn't necessarily mean only now. There was the now a little while ago, and there's going to be the now in the future. Now is is flexible in that sense, okay? They were with Jesus for years. Didn't they believe any of these things the week before, or a year before, or 2 years before, or however long before? What is it special about now? Now they embrace some of these things? No, this is just simply a general description to say that, okay, yeah, before they believed some of these things, they knew some of these things, but now they understand this, they believe this, they embrace this, they are keeping this more. All right? That's what I see here. Is that before, yeah, they kind of knew, they kept, they believed, but now they keep, they believe, they know a little bit more. And you know what? Probably next week, or a month later, or a year later, or 10 years later, they will believe this a little bit more, and a little bit more. All right, so let's look at some of these things that Jesus mentions about what they now, all right, what they now believe. Again, in verse 7, now they have known, okay, well, that all these things, what things? All things given to Jesus were from God. All the things that Jesus said were given to him by God. Now they know it, right? That's what he's communicating here in verse 7. Well, they knew that what he was saying was from God before. They knew that. And so what this implies is that now they know it more. Okay? Now they can embrace that truth more. Now their conviction concerning their belief that what Jesus is saying came from God, their conviction is increased. It is more. Now it is more. All right? And later, it probably will be, or hopefully, will be more than that. Now they know that what God has given to, that what Jesus has expressed to them was given to him by God. Now they got that, okay? They know that Jesus came from God. Now they know that Jesus came from God. Now, if you would have asked them before, do you believe that Jesus came from God? They would say, yeah, I know that. But now they know it more. Okay, that God sent him. They knew that God sent him, but now they know it more. All right, and later they probably will know it even more. Okay, and so don't be so disoriented by him using the word now. So it means, in effect, a little more now, and probably a little bit more later. So with that perspective, let's go back to verse 7. John chapter 17, verse 7. Now they have known that all things which you have given me are from you, which means now we know this a little bit more. For I have given to them the words which you have given me, and they have received them, and have known surely that I came forth from you. Now they know surely, more surely, that Jesus has come forth from God, and they have believed that you sent me. They believed it before, but now they believe it more. Okay? That's verse 7 and 8. But then in verse 9, he says something really interesting. In verse 9, I pray for them. I do not pray for the world, but for those whom you have given me, for they are yours. He does not pray for the world. I pray for these guys. But I have no prayer for everyone else. All right? Now, if you use the word prayer differently, and just simply say that prayer is an exotic word that means you are talking with God. You know, you're talking with God. If you're talking with me, we call it talking. If you're talking with God, well, we have a special word for that because God is divine. We say you're praying. All right? And what he says here in that sense is, listen, God, if I'm going to be a man, I just want you to know that I have a lot to talk about when it comes to these people who believe in you. These guys, I have things to say. I have things to share. I have things that I want you and I to relate to one another about. But for the rest of these people, I don't have anything to say. I have nothing to say. There's nothing to talk about. We don't even have to acknowledge their existence. Okay? Jesus does not pray for people who don't believe in him. He doesn't pray for those people. Now listen, if you feel inspired at any time to pray for the lost, by all means, do so. I don't want to discourage that at all. And maybe there would be some times when Jesus would express some prayer for those who don't want to have anything to do with him at all. Maybe that would be the case. I will allow for that in the sense that I will be open to situations like that, circumstances like that. I just want you to see that at this time, at the end, when he's done, he's already done it all, and he's done his works. He's done the work of God. He's completed the works that God gave him to do. And when it's all over, he says, listen, I just want you to know that, I don't have anything to say about these people who rejected me. Okay? There's nothing to say. Nothing to say at all. And I just find that interesting, the way that he includes that in here in verse 9. Let's move forward then into verse 10 and 11. In verse 10, and all mine are yours, and yours are mine, and I am glorified in them. He is known in them through their belief and their trust and their acknowledgement of the truth. And to say all are mine, all mine are yours, and yours are mine, it's another way of him making the divine expression, or to say that he is the living God, and the living God is him. It's the same person. It's a way of saying that before his life is over and he makes the change to be unified more with himself by no longer expressing himself as a man in the way that he was doing before. That's the difference, okay? So verse 10 is another way for Jesus to publicly state his divinity. Verse 11, I am no longer in the world, but these are in the world. And I come to you, Holy Father, keep through your name those whom you have given me, that they may be one as we are. Okay, in beginning of verse 11, now I am no longer in the world. Well, he's going to be in the world for another day here. All right, so it's just an abstraction to say that he's no longer in the world. It's a way of saying that he's no longer going to be a participant in the way that he was. He's effectively done. Now they're going to kill him, so be it. But these are in the world. They're going to stay. And I come to you, Holy Father, keep through your name those whom you have given me, that they may be one as we are. All right, now the description of as we are is a way of saying that he really is himself, and that the unification in this case is based on reality. Okay, and another way to define reality is to say that there is truth. Okay, now that he's praying that these disciples that he is leaving behind, that they may be one. The only way that they're going to be one, because they're definitely not the same person, all right? They're not going to be one as Jesus and as the Father and the Son and Jesus and the living God are one. They cannot be one in the same way in totality. But they can be one in the context of the truth. They can be bound together as one because of the truth that they believe. All right? So does that mean that they all believe the same thing 100%. Is that what it means? And I would say that that's not going to happen. It's unlikely. Now, maybe there's some people who would like to believe that the disciples were 100%, they all believed the same thing. All right, maybe that's the case, but, I don't see it, right? Especially when you continue to read in the book of Acts and you see the lives that they live and the kinds of discussions that take place, especially when the Apostle Paul came on the scene, all right, and you examine what they were doing and you look at what happened to them, all right, I don't see that there's 100% concerning agreement when it comes to what people are going to believe. So they're not going to be completely unified 100%. But to the degree that they are in agreement, all right, to the degree that they all believe the same thing, that will be the degree by which they have the oneness that Jesus speaks of. Okay, now you have to be careful with this because they could believe something that isn't true. What happens then? What happens if you have two people who believe the same thing? They are one with one another, but what they believe isn't true. All right, what do we do with that? Well, they can have a sense of unity. They can have a sense of agreement. All right, they can have that, but they are not going to have agreement with God. Okay, God is not going to be a part of that unity. And that will eventually be known. However that's going to be known, that's an individual experience, of course. But, I can tell the difference between an assembly of people who believe things that are not true, and yet they all believe the same thing, and the assembly of people who believe things that are true, and they believe the same thing. I can tell the difference because of the divine participation or the lack thereof. Whether the Spirit of God is there or the Spirit of God is not. Whether there is the testimony of the Holy Spirit of what is real and true or it is not there. There is a distinctive difference. When you do not have the Spirit of God, this unity is going to be weak. All right? It just is. It's going to be weak, and it's my belief that these people, deep down inside, somewhere, they know that what they believe really isn't true. That there's going to be some conviction that takes place, that the Holy Spirit is going to speak to them in some way. They're going to know. They're going to have doubts. They're going to realize that. And so while they may try to reinforce it with each other as much as they may do that, that doesn't mean that they're going to have the conviction that is necessary to really hold this oneness together well. All right? It's not going to be held together well and can easily be fractured, fragmented, and broken. All right? These people and their oneness can easily one day just dissolve. Or they may be hanging on by some thread that will keep them going until they're physically dead. But during that time, before they get there, they're going to know that there is tremendous weakness in this unity, in this oneness that they think they have. And so, I do believe that people can experience a sense of oneness. However, I also believe that God will find a way to reveal to them that what they have just really isn't it. Okay? And with those who know the truth, when God participates in that, and when he joins in as part of the oneness that he is praying that his disciples may have, when people experience that today, it is unique. It is real. Okay, and Jesus is praying for that. He's talking with God about this. I would really like this to be. But what are the conditions? What makes this possible? What makes this possible is the individual, all right? It is the decision of the individual, each individual, to surrender to and embrace the truth. It is the decision of each individual in the collective group that we may be considering. And the strength of the oneness will depend on the strength of the individuals who make up the assembly. And how valid what they believe really is. If what they believe is the genuine truth that God would agree with. God has an opinion about what's true and what's not true too. And if each individual is consistent with the truth that God has revealed, if they are bound to their God individually on the basis of this truth, all right, if each individual has this unique personal connection with their God that is true and real, if that is present, then when they encounter another person who also has this individual connection with their God on the basis of the truth that has been manifested to them and they have believed and surrendered to, then these people can join together and they will have oneness with one another because they already have oneness with the same God. That's how it works, okay? That's how this is real. And when there are individuals who don't have this, you have a lack of oneness. All right? That's just how it goes. Now, no one is going to have 100% truth. All right? No, I wouldn't expect that. All right? I'm thankful I don't have to determine that. But not everyone is going to have 100% in terms of what they're going to embrace, believe, depend on, and rely on. Okay? So the amount of oneness will never be absolute perfection. Okay? It's never going to be that. But whatever it is, we can enjoy. Whatever it is, we can enjoy. And if we were to put it on a scale of percentages and say, well, we're never going to see 100%, we're definitely not going to see 0%. Maybe we've got 70%. Maybe we've got 40%. But whatever it is, let us enjoy as much oneness as we can have with one another. And understand that each individual is experiencing transitions in life, growth and maturity in the faith, which is always measured by an increase of the knowledge of the truth and the application of that truth in our lives on an individual basis, and that this is an ongoing experience. And to recognize, that what we may have right now is wonderful, but that later on we should anticipate, expect, perhaps enjoy an increase in that oneness with one another as we increase individually in our oneness with our God. All right? So that's what I see in verse 11. Those are a number of different subjects because I covered a lot of ground here in John chapter 17, verse 5, to review between John chapter 17, verse 5 and verse 11. To review this a little bit in the context of verse 5, he's speaking about ending his life as a man. He's going to go back to just being God. All right, his time as a man is ending. That's verse 5. And verse 6 talks about giving people to himself, and he does that through the revelation of the truth. Verse 7 and 8, he speaks about the things that they now believe. All right? And in verse 9, he mentions, I'm not going to pray for the unbelievers. But in verse 10, he speaks about the glorification a little bit more. In verse 11, I wanted to emphasize his desire that we may be one, and that would be possible through what we embrace, some of which he says now, that we embrace now, and to what degree we embrace that. Okay, so for those of you who are using this for your small groups, I have a question for you that could facilitate some discussion. When was your moment when you could say, now I believe? When was your moment when you could say about something, just whatever you could relate to, something unique about what you could believe or know about your God? What was that moment? What was going on in your life? What were the circumstances? Where were you? When you had that moment where you could say, now I believe this. What could you share about that now that you experienced back then? Okay, I think it's a good question, something that could facilitate a lot of conversation. And I will proceed in John chapter 17 in the next message. Thanks.